Good morning, everybody. My class select board here for workshop. Began a few years ago as a consequence of merging from our town governance study committee, and we've been able to put on an educational program every year since then, and so I'm delighted to welcome you here. If you haven't had a chance, don't need to do it now, but there's the sign-in sheet in the back. There's also an outline of the morning's events, and probably most importantly, there's a handbook that is there for all committee members. So please don't hesitate to take that. Also, as you leave this morning, we have a bunch of handouts that are associated with the presentations that are going to be made, and they'll be back on the back table as we end the presentation this morning. So again, welcome very much. We have a few sessions this morning. The first session, the town clerk, Harry, will be up in just a moment to talk about changes in open meeting law and public records law. And then Carmen, the town moderator, will talk to us about town meeting. And then third, the chair of the select board, Tom McCain, will talk to us about effective meeting management, and then I'll sort of come back at the very end to answer any question, not answer, but facilitate answering of questions that might not have got addressed during the three sessions. All right, so Carrie, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Let's just get this. Remind me. All right, thank you. All right, in this session, we'll be covering the oath of office. I'll be going over briefly the committee handbook, that nice large document you can curl up with some cold evening. And the legal summaries and resources that are available to you as well. And then following the session, we'll have time for questions. So let's start with the oath of office. Whether you've been elected or appointed to your board, the first thing you need to do to become an official voting member of the board is to be sworn in. You only become a voting member of your committee once you are sworn in. So let's do this together. Raise your right hand, and we can just read that together. I promise to faithfully and impartially perform the duties of the office to which I've been appointed. Thank you. You're now a formal member of a body. I know most of you have been sworn in already, but it's a good exercise to go through, just to remind you of the words. Be aware that when you're wearing your committee hat, so to speak, like all members of public bodies, you have to abide by the conflict of interest law, the open meeting law, and the public records law. This ensures transparency, even if at times it's at the cost of efficiency. When you take your oath of office, you'll receive a committee handbook that contains 2 acknowledgement forms on the last 2 pages, and a memo at the front of the book that gives you the URL for the state ethics online training. Within 2 weeks, you need to complete and return those acknowledgements. To help you become familiar with these laws, there are a number of resources available to you. You're required to acknowledge that you've received, understand, and will stay up to date with the open meeting law and conflict of interest law. And as I said, you need to take that online training every 2 years. The Division of Open Government and the Ethics Commission provide a wealth of information on their website, at training workshops, as well as over the phone. Very briefly, the Town of Concord has collected the required legal materials as well as local policies and procedures into a committee handbook to explain the requirements and guide you as a member of your committee. You can see from the listing here, it is a large document The reason it's so large is because of the legal summaries that we are required to provide to you. So rather than having a number of handouts, we thought we'd bind them together and include things on a local level like administrative policies and procedures, appointment policies and procedures, appendices such as the checklists, things that you can also find online, but it's nice to have that quick reference available to you when you need it. So here are the statutory references for the legal summaries, but really they're to ensure integrity and public confidence in government by providing a framework for government accountability to make sure that the public has access to committee activities. As a board or committee member, you're considered a municipal employee whether or not you're paid, and you need to be sure that your private interests aren't in conflict with your public duties and vice versa. How do you avoid getting into an unintended ethical dilemma? You want to review the educational material in your handbook, complete the online training, submit the acknowledgement, and consult advisories, as well as reading enforcement cases online. That sounds different. Nothing illustrates the law more clearly than the opinions and enforcement page. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to look at that, but it's really very helpful. You cannot use your position to gain favor or financial benefit for yourself or an immediate family member. I'm going to give you some examples of violations. A developer offers a ski trip to a board member who oversees the developer's application for a special permit. A school committee member's spouse is a teacher in the town's school system. The school committee member votes on a budget line item for teachers' salaries. A member of the Affordable Housing Committee represents a client to the committee on a housing issue. And it's not limited to actual conflict. The appearance of conflict of interest can be just as damaging. For instance, a developer who is the cousin of the chair of the Conservation Commission has filed an application with a commission. A reasonable person would conclude that the chair might favor their cousin. The chair files a written disclosure with her appointing authority, explaining her relationship with her cousin prior to the meeting at which the application will be considered. In this example, there is no violation. It's complicated. If you think you have a conflict, it's always better to get advice before a potential violation occurs. The Ethics Commission is staffed with lawyers who give confidential advice. If someone calls me wondering if they may have a conflict, I always refer them to the Ethics Commission because it is confidential. I cannot call on your behalf. No one can ask the question on your behalf. They will not advise someone else on your issue. So when in doubt, ask. So to help you stay informed, the Ethics Commission has some wonderful online information. I've included the URL. It is very easy to navigate. It's a good idea to bookmark this webpage to stay informed. The open meeting law, like the conflict of interest law, is required reading for boards and committees. The Division of Open Government, the enforcing authority, requires that you not only read and understand the law and education materials, but also that you stay up to date, which can be challenging because they're not necessarily reaching out to you. The laws and regulations and guidelines provide great detail on how to call a meeting, where to hold it, and how to make a record of it. And the law and its nuances affect your conduct as a public body. The interpretation of the open meeting law is constantly changing based on complaints and determinations. It's fairly important to bookmark this page as well. The Division of Open Government regularly holds training sessions. This fall they held 2 webinars. They also have regional training, and they also have training videos. This is just a listing of the most recent open meeting law training session that they have broken into 5 to 15-minute segments. Very easy, very helpful, and they have a transcript online of the entire meeting as well. I'm not going to get into detail about meeting management because Tom is going to be talking about that in the segment on effective meeting management. Now to the definitions. They're sometimes difficult to apply to situations that boards and committees come to, so this may be something that we pause on later to talk about more, and as we get into meeting management and situations that can occur. So let's just start by getting the definitions down. So the public body is a multiple member body that is established to serve a public purpose regardless of how it is created. So the select board is elected, the planning board is appointed by the select board, and the West Concord Advisory Committee, for instance, is appointed by the planning board. They and the nearly 50 boards and committees that exist through election or appointment are all subject to the open meeting law. And a quorum is a simple majority of the members of the public body. For instance, a quorum of a 5-person committee is 3, even if one of those seats is vacant. A subquorum is less than a quorum. A subquorum may discuss something committee-related without posting the meeting as long as the discussion doesn't then get passed on to another committee member. That's considered serial communication and is especially easy with email and very much in violation of the open meeting law. A subcommittee is a multiple member group, more than one person, created by a formal action of a public body to do committee work. If one person is assigned to do committee work, that one person has the responsibility to report back. If other people want to volunteer to assist that person, it is still the obligation of that one person to report back to the committee. If the public body assigns, designates, or appoints 2 people to complete a task, they have created a multi-member body, and that group of 2 or more is subject to the open meeting law. Deliberation. An oral or written communication through any medium, including electronic mail, between or among a quorum of a public body or on any public business within its jurisdiction. Deliberation among a quorum has to be conducted during a properly posted open meeting, unless it adjourns to executive session for one of 10 purposes. A social gathering is not considered deliberation as long as you are not talking business of your committee. This training session is not considered deliberation as long as you don't later talk about business of your committee. Yes?
Could you expand a little bit on how actually the deliberations outside committee work? I'm a member of the HPC, and we are extremely careful in not assembling more than 2 of us in any gathering, be it social or, in other words, if 3 of us find ourselves in the street, we have a tendency to say goodbye and one of them to go away.
I can understand. Oh, yes. So the question is, how does a committee deal with gathering on the street, happening to see each other? I can understand where you get to the point of feeling that you can't talk to each other except about committee matters, and it always must be at a publicly posted meeting. And that really gets in the way of everyday life. And it can be challenging because, the eyes of the public are on you. So if you see each other and you're gathering and talking, is someone going to suspect something? But you're not precluded from meeting and talking about other things. It's just you have to make sure it's not committee business. It can become apparent that you're talking about committee business if you are at a meeting and you are very ready to make some decisions and there doesn't seem to have been any deliberation and yet everyone knows what the other seems to be thinking about something. That is going to raise concerns. So it's really, the law is about trying to protect protect you from inadvertently having that discussion carry over into something, because you're there talking about it and something just occurred to you and you want to bring it up. That's the kind of thing you want to be careful of. But social meeting absolutely is allowed. Sure. Let me just make sure I'm on that note. Okay, so let's talk about exclusions. And this has been a change in open meeting law. The exclusion, the second one, distribution of reports or documents to be discussed provided no opinion of a member of the public body is expressed. There is recent case law related to this exclusion that overturned a decision of the Division of Open Government. Attorney Kevin Batt of Anderson Krieger explains, and you have a copy of this decision. You will have a copy in the handout that is available at the end of this workshop. And the decision actually changes the open meeting law guidelines. So very briefly, members of a committee in another community submitted comments on a draft to one committee member. That committee member compiled the comments and recirculated the draft. The documents were made public after the meeting. The Attorney General ruled that it was okay because one person on the board took on the administrative task of compiling the report, but the SJC overturned that, ruling because the exemption only applies if no opinion of a member is expressed. So it's a good idea to read the article. I'm really summarizing it, but it's about sharing opinions, and all of these things seem to get into the way of accomplishing work, but you can understand as a member of the public where if the committee is discussing things via shared opinions or edits, the public doesn't have access to that. The second handout, yes?
Friends, which includes some of the committee members, does that count as, and they give their opinion on, this is a worthy article, or, we should go to this meeting, or I encourage people. Is that a violation?
Well, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
I need to repeat that question because even with the mic, a lot of people couldn't hear it, please.
Okay, so if people are, if a person is sending an email to a group of people that includes other committee members, where they are expressing their opinion or their desire for people to go to a meeting for a certain reason, I don't know that that is in itself deliberation. It's more of an opinion of something that is being deliberated. So it gets very tricky. And I will tell you, the Division of Open Government is also staffed with lawyers. And they're also very helpful. And if you're planning on sending something out, it's always better to check. They will look at the text. They will tell you whether this is crossing the line,
Along those same lines, I'm on a committee where sometimes it's important to send out a draft of a letter and ask the committee members to review that draft. And with this new law, would you recommend that we come to our meeting with our edits rather than email all our edits to each other?
So let me answer, or partly answer that with the example of the second handout that is a determination from the Division of Open Government that relates to and relates back to that SJC ruling. So in this case, there were 3 drafts circulated to a board from town council. One of the board members expressed an opinion to town council only, which resulted in a revision of the drafts. The other board members were not aware that the revisions included the opinion of one of the board members. The Division of Open Government did not find a violation, saying that unlike the overturned ruling, other members did not know that there was an opinion of one member in that second draft. The Division of Open Government did advise that any revisions to the original draft should be presented at an open meeting in the future. So that means that the work that you're doing as an individual, you're doing outside of the meeting. The work that you're doing as a group where you're discussing revisions, that is something you need to post. That is something that you need to do in open meeting because you're deliberating. You're discussing changes, you're sharing changes, and that will lead to further comment.
I just want to remind everyone that if anybody is going to be speaking and raising their hand, please wait to get the microphone.
Yes.
Are there any rules yet on electronic deliberation over the internet, say like FaceTime or through Skype?
Well, deliberation of any kind among a quorum has to be done in a posted meeting.
Yeah, so like a subcommittee, because now in a Skype session you can have multiple people. So
a subcommittee is also subject to open meeting law.
okay, so
And
the
it
same
has to be
rules would
properly
apply.
posted. There is remote participation. That's something that I think Tom will be getting into. But let me quickly jump ahead to the open meeting law checklists, and we'll come back around. I'm sure this issue will come up again as we're talking about the effective meeting management and also what can possibly go wrong or what can happen. These are things that are important to everyone, but let me just get through the rest of the definitions and in open meeting law and then public records, and then we'll come back around to that, okay? So open meeting law, the checklists that are included in the committee handbook, they will help you with some basic tasks as far as for instance, what needs to be included in the notice. It's the agenda, how detailed that needs to be. When you're entering executive session, as I mentioned before, there are very limited reasons that you can do that. There is a process by which you enter executive session that you have to adhere to. Preliminary screening committee is a special type of committee with very limited purpose that can be an executive session. There's a checklist on that. And then there's a checklist on creation of minutes. Minutes are really important. Minutes need to be detailed. They are not transcript. He said, she said does not need to happen, but there needs to be enough detail in the summary that people who did not attend the meeting can understand what happened at the meeting. And more than that, as an historical document, people need to be able to understand how the decisions of the town came to be. If there is a 90-minute discussion on something and the minutes reflect that this item was discussed, that's probably not enough detail. In fact, it's not enough detail. Minutes need to be approved within 2 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. Forward your minutes to the appointing authority and also to the town clerk. Meeting minutes are a permanent record, so we keep hard copy of that. and we also get them online as quickly as possible. There's a records management policy in your committee handbook that discusses minutes as well. You should read that. If you're on a temporary committee, after that committee dissolves, all those records should be turned over to the town clerk. Open meeting law complaints, very briefly. There is a form that a person has to fill out, a very specific form. You have a copy of it in your handbook. It goes to the committee. It is a process. Don't take it personally. You need to respond to it. You have 30 days to, they have 30 days to file the complaint. You have 14 days to respond. You need to discuss it in open session. And then that is either the end of it, or if the person is not satisfied with your response, they will appeal to the supervisor, to the Division of Open Government. It's important to let your appointing authority or the town clerk know if you've received an open meeting law complaint, because this is a town issue, so the town needs to know about it. Here are some examples of complaints. What they have in common is generally that someone feels excluded in the process. Not all complaints result in violations, but they often move to recommendations for improvement in communication. And remember that it's not a law trying to trip you up or keep you from doing your work. The law is meant to be a guideline for you and offer protection for the public to keep government open. Here's open meeting law. Contact information. And now we'll jump into the public records law. As it relates to your boards and committees, you can find yourself getting, people will call them Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests. That really relates to federal documents. Public records requests relate to state documents. What is considered a public record? Emails, texts, paper, communication, any form of communication is a public record. So parts of the Public Records Law Guide and the Public Records Access Guidelines for the Town of Concord are included in your handbook. Material that is discussed or referred to at the meeting has to be kept for at least a year, regardless of what its other retention value is, so that if someone has a request for that, it can be readily produced. Not all public records are subject to disclosure. There are very specific exemptions, and the person responding to the public records request, the custodian of those records, has the obligation of explaining and proving what the exemption is to disclosure. As I said, public records request can be.
Hi, I had a question about the exemptions.
Yes.
And is there a need to, do you provide like a privilege log or something that states that a document exists but you can't release it? Is it supposed to be detailed in that fashion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so it's good to get the town clerk's office or your appointing authority involved. You really need to. We are designated as records access officers, and we have obligations of responding within 10 business days to public records requests. So it's important to share that information so that we can start moving on that. It may involve many departments or committees. But only a written request can be appealed to the supervisor of public records. So if someone states a request at a meeting, they really need to put that request in writing. That is really what starts the clock. If we miss those deadlines of responding to public records requests, we cannot charge for them, and sometimes it takes a lot of time to pull these requests together. In conclusion, I'd just like to remind you that committee work is official and public business. and has to be conducted and documented with that in mind. Committee records must be created and kept with an historical perspective. These are the documents that inform future generations of government actions. You're doing the work on your committees that provides the basis for decisions that shape your community. And it's important to work in cooperation with your appointing authority, with town staff, and with other boards and committees as your charge requires. You're doing important work of the town, and I want to thank you, and I want to let you know that the town clerk's office and other departments are ready to help you in whatever way you need. I will take questions now, and then Carmen will take up session 2. Yes. Oh, we'll wait for the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So, open meeting law. So if the committee assigns somebody in the committee to go, for example, to a government office to look up some records, and somebody else on the committee office to go with them to help, does that constitute a subcommittee? And do we have to post that that's going to happen before they visit the department office?
So my understanding is that it's when, did everyone hear the question? Okay. So the formal action of the committee is what's important. So if the committee has designated one person to do the job, then it is the responsibility of one person to report back. If someone else is volunteering to help that person, it's not a combined effort. They're helping that one person to get their work done.
Thank you.
It's something that I would recommend if you are looking at working on something. Talk to the Division of Open Government, because one question often leads to another, and it's really about context. You know, what is it you're doing? Who is it for? If it's for a public body, a committee, that's different than if it's for one person who is, for instance, the town manager or the school superintendent. That is very different than if you're doing something for the school committee or the select board.
A question about the conflict of interest. What happens when there are legal proceedings involved? I was personally sued by an unhappy applicant to the Historic Districts Commission for a decision that he did not like. And so were other members of the Historic Districts Commission. However, deliberations about the subject of this lawsuit continued. And the concern that I had was that they could be, whatever decision was made, could be interpreted of having been pressure by this ongoing personal lawsuit. In other words, if I'm being sued by this applicant, I may be favoring his position so he can get the lawsuit off my shoulders, and vice versa. As he's suing me, then now I'm getting back to him and not following what would be his purposes. So how you manage those situations? Should all the deliberations stop until the legal issues are resolved, or is it possible to continue under this question of whether you are acting by the motives of a threat or acting according to your principles?
That's a very important question, and I think that the best course in that case is to talk to your appointing authority and talk to town council, because there are two legal issues there that relate to the town and your relationship to your work on the committee. I wouldn't dare to try to answer that for you. I think that would really require talking to council.
Hi, I just have a quick question. Every committee has a clerk that's responsible for doing minutes. And often to get the minutes done in 30 days, we have to draft the minutes and send them to committee members and ask for feedback, usually prior to the next meeting. So does that, how does that fall in line with the interpretation of not collecting opinions from committee members? And what implications does that have for clerks?
That is a great question. Did everyone hear that question? Okay, so that was about drafting meeting minutes and the timeline within which you're supposed to have your minutes produced. How are you able to forward drafts to committee members to circulate that information so that you can actually approve those minutes? And I would say, based on what the SJC's ruling is, that you can't do that, which does complicate things. I think that having draft minutes prepared and moving forward on the process of accepting those minutes is what's important to do. You know, some committees, and I imagine the law is there because some committees would never even draft the minutes from the notes that they took. And by the way, public records law says that the clerk's notes are public record until minutes are created. So creating the draft minutes and circulating them allows the committee at the next meeting either to approve them as amended and discuss those. And so that means that it takes more time at a meeting to discuss the minutes, or review the comments and then schedule acceptance of those minutes at the meeting following that.
So just a follow-up question, because having been clerk on a couple committees, can you hear? Okay. Because often what I get are lots of comments on minutes. And so the question is, what is the most effective way to review all those minutes? Do we have to make copies of them available for the public during the meeting? Is that sufficient, and therefore then someone can consolidate them? I'm just concerned about the process can get really elongated, if you will. If the public needs to see the opinions of the members, it just gets tricky. And I don't know how to handle that if you're saying they should be reviewed in the minutes in the following meeting, because then you've got, in my committee, there's 5 committee members, each of which has their own feedback on the minutes. Then do we have to display all 5 sets of feedback on the minutes just to finalize the minutes? And maybe this is something the town can take back and advise back to committees. You don't have to answer it on the spot. I just think this is a particularly challenging topic. So maybe the town can follow up on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's volumes and volumes of paper. I don't know that you necessarily have to have copies of everything available for the public, but you need to have, you need to state the documents that are available, and so that would mean that you have to have the drafts available. Do you use, just curiosity, do you use the review function like in Microsoft Word where you would update that, or do you ask committee members to do that?
Yeah, they're almost always red line versions.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's helpful, but then I understand that to compile them takes time, and to circulate, if you're not able to circulate the compiled record, then how can people have, so it almost forces you to have 2 meetings to actually approve minutes. And I will bring that to the Division of Open Government. I think that's a really important question. Yeah.
I have a related question. I think what we've been doing is okay, but I want to check. It's related to this. We have a document, let's say a letter we have to send out, and what we do is the chairperson or the staff person drafts the letter, and then everybody on the committee, there's 9 people, if anybody has any changes, they send the changes, revisions to the staff person, not to anybody on the committee. Then the
Yes.
staff person maybe sends that out, but with no deliberation, or brings it to the next meeting, and then we discuss and approve it at that meeting. So that way, no staff person is collecting all these opinions. No committee person is collecting the opinions. Just the staff person puts them all together in a new draft.
And that is a great solution. That is the solution that works for those committees that have staff people. Right. Yeah, yes. Yes, okay, thank you, everyone.
So if there are other questions, just hold them and we'll get to them, but we want to make sure we get through all of the material this morning. So next, Carmen Reese, the town moderator, is going to talk to us about town meeting. Carmen.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Carmen Reese, Town Moderator. I'm going to talk about preparing for town meeting, and I'll have 3 topics to talk about. The first is the timeline for the annual town meeting cycle, and the second is committee responsibilities if you're sponsoring an article, and the third is committee responsibilities if you are not sponsoring an article. So, we're basically working on town meeting 9 months out of the year. Everybody gets May, June, and July off, and then we're back to work by August. And August through the fall, August through November, the things that are going on include the budget process. We have 3 budgeting units in town. We have the town, which includes all its enterprise funds. We have the Concord Public Schools, and we have the Concord-Carlisle Regional School District. And each of those entities starts working on their budgets, and the Finance Committee begins working with them and working on their budget guideline process. The Community Preservation Committee is another committee that has a very long process, and they get started in August or September with a meeting explaining to everybody how you have to file, what do you have to do to file an application for money from the fund. And then they have largely guided by statute and also by a town process procedure that unfolds over many weeks and includes a lot of hearings. Zoning bylaw amendments are the work of the planning department and the planning board, and they are working on these really from the time we closed town meeting to be thinking about what else do we need to deal with and to be working through the implications of a change here on everything else that's in the zoning bylaw, a complex process. And sometimes there are substantive changes that are policy changes that might require hearings or subcommittees and so forth, and those are unfolding through this period of time. Committee-sponsored articles, whether, for example, the Historical Commission is working on demolition delay bylaw, various other kinds of things, these also are articles that take a lot of time to work through, take multiple meetings, take research, take a lot of time to collect community input and to process it and to work with town staff. And often there's overlap with other boards. So there might be a need to consult with other boards. So all these things are taking place over this period of time. In the perfect world, citizen petitions are also being developed over a series of months and not being something that occurs to people when the warrant opens. And they have 30 days to get the thing in. Okay, second phase, preparation of the warrant. We start this December 1st. It's all this work has been done on those phases that we were working on through the fall. And by the way, all of this appears in the town meeting schedule that includes elections, town meeting schedule, hearings, and so forth. That's available online. Usually there's paper copies of it here in the townhouse. I don't see any today, but all of these items are scheduled every year, and as a matter of fact, those dates get scheduled back in August or September, what the whole schedule will look like for the coming year. So this year, the town meeting preview meeting will take place on December 1st, and the warrant will open on the same day. Draft articles will be due about 10 days after the warrant opens, and the warrant will close at 4 p.m. It's always 4 p.m., and it's typically about 30 days after the warrant opens, but that will vary a little bit with exactly when it opened given the holidays. So this year, the warrant will close on January 3rd. After that, there is a warrant review meeting with town council where we make sure that we don't have any language glitches. We make sure that we have done everything correctly. Oftentimes, there is a bond council review that happens for any financing articles, and that's coordinated by the finance director. And clearly, any changes that happen in the language of the article can't really change substantively what was submitted before the warrant was closed, because we don't want to defeat the purpose of opening the warrant and closing it at a particular time. But there can be tweaks. And then once that review is done and everything is finalized, the warrant goes to the printer. Comes back from the printer, gets posted, it gets mailed to every household. Okay, our next phase of the town meeting cycle is the hearings, and these happen in February, March of every year. The Finance Committee has 3 hearings. The first one is on the town budget, the second is on school budgets, and their third hearing is on the enterprise funds. The Planning Board by law is required to have a hearing on every zoning bylaw proposal and to make a recommendation to town meeting on every zoning bylaw proposal. The Finance Committee also has that obligation by town bylaw to make a recommendation to every, and state law, to make a recommendation on every article that comes before town meeting that has a financing implication. And then finally, the Select Board has a hearing, and their hearing is typically a kind of a catch-all. It's policy issues, it tends to be citizen petitions that don't have a financial component to them, and it's policy issues. Yes? Yes, hold on.
The purpose of the public hearing is to solicit comments from the public, is that correct? It's not just to inform the public what's going on. In other words, the public as of right is entitled to comment at the public hearing.
Yes, that's absolutely true, and I'll talk about that more when we get to the committee responsibilities, especially when a committee is sponsoring an article.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, in March, we're working on motions and presentations. All draft motions have to be submitted. Now, it's not required to have your draft motion ready for the hearings, but it's a really good idea to be ready with that motion, because it's the motion that town meeting acts on, not the article, and there is always a little bit of leeway in terms of what that motion looks like. It needs to be within the scope of the article, but it can change a little bit to address issues that may surround the proposal. And it's a good idea to have that motion ready so that the motion, everyone understands what the motion is going to be at the hearing. It's not strictly speaking required, but my view is it's a really good idea. The consent calendar also gets finalized in March, and that is the moderator's job, and that happens after all of the hearings are complete. And the decision what goes on the consent calendar usually has to do with what's routine, what we do every year, and we're all content that we understand that process, what is uncontroversial. I have been thinking recently that the enterprise funds, they all take turns on the consent calendar, and I think it's important to have all of the enterprise funds come up at least periodically for a full discussion on the floor of town meeting. The Finance Committee prepares its report and sends it to the printer. Once all the motions are in by the motion deadline, there is another review that happens with Town Council of all the motions. And we dot all the i's and cross all the t's on motions, identify any issues that we're going to have, go back to committees or individuals or town departments if Town Council indicates that we have a problem with something, to make sure that they understand recommendations that are being made and that whatever changes need to be made are made. And the moderator's role in that is to make sure that every motion still remains within the scope of the article. Annual town meeting presentations are prepared and handouts are prepared and submitted to the moderator for review. Nothing gets presented at town meeting and nothing gets put on a table outside of town meeting without the moderator and town staff looking at it and approving it. Then we have an annual town meeting presentation coordination meeting, and we have everyone who's speaking on an article come to that meeting, and in looking at the whole meeting and all the presentation time that's going to be required, we allot time to everyone, and everyone needs to prepare their presentations to stay within their time limits. The Finance Committee report then comes back from the printer and it gets mailed to every household. And that's a really important report. It has the whole warrant in it. It has the Finance Committee's recommendations on every article. It has the Select Board's recommendations on every article. And it has a whole boatload of information on the revenues and expenses of the town and the general economic climate that we're looking at. So it's really required reading for everyone coming to town meeting. It's also award-winning over and over again statewide because it's done so well. Okay, then we get to annual town meeting in April. And of course, at this point, everyone has had the annual town meeting dates reserved in their calendar for months, so no one has scheduled a conflict. And we do our best to get there. All the PowerPoint presentations have been approved. They're loaded on the town's computer and ready to go. All the handouts have been approved. They've been copied on white paper, double-sided, in the appropriate number, and delivered to the meeting by 6 o'clock. Spoken presentations have been rehearsed by everybody, and everyone has timed themselves to know that they're going to be able to live within their time limits. And importantly, amendments have been vetted and prepared, and oftentimes, and this is part of a committee responsibility, oftentimes there'll be a proposal that a particular committee thinks that that's okay with us, but we'd like to see it amended to add the following condition or require, whatever, some additional thing. It's okay, but. And it's a really good idea to have that amendment vetted by your committee at a public meeting, put down on paper, and given to the sponsor of the article. They might think your idea is so great they're going to do that themselves. They're going to change their motion, so there won't be any need to amend the article. And if that happens, that's a good thing. It's a whole lot more efficient to deal with it that way on the floor of town meeting. And if there are any legal issues that might be posed, any legal problems by a proposed amendment, it's great if we know what those are long in advance, have time to chat with town council about them, and have time to determine whether a language change might solve the legal problem. And when these amendments are prepared and they're in writing and they're submitted in advance to us at town meeting, and the requirement is you need 3 copies, they need to get loaded up on the screen, town council needs to look at it, the moderator needs to have it. we are so much more efficient and spend so much less time dealing with amendments if that groundwork has already been done. So that's why I add this to the list of things that should be done. Okay. Now, committee responsibilities. If you're sponsoring an article. So first of all, you're going to develop your proposal within your committee structure. And that means you've got to observe the open meeting law. It means you should be taking and considering public comment. It means you should be coordinating with any other committee that you know will have an interest in your proposal or that maybe has overlapping responsibility. And it's really important to keep your committee minutes up to date and posted while you're developing a proposal, because this is where citizens are going to look when they want to understand, well, where did this come from? They're going to go look for the minutes. The League of Women Voters is going to go look for your minutes for your committee. And if they aren't there, it's very frustrating to people. Important to discuss your proposal with your select board liaison. Every committee has a select board liaison, and in the perfect world, you do that by September, so there's plenty of time for various interests to coalesce. You may not have realized all the impacts your proposal might have. If it has an impact on the budgeting process, really important for that to be understood up front. 4 articles that you know will have a financial impact. You want to quantify what the impact of your proposal will be. And you should be identifying what you think the source of the fund is. Is this an addition to the line item budget somewhere? Is it going to come out of free cash, or is it going to come from somewhere else? Is it going to come from ticket revenues, whatever? Good idea. If you have committee staff, ask your committee staff to talk with the town manager's office about the funding requirements of your proposal. If you don't have any committee staff and you're thinking about an article proposal that has a financial component, ask your appointing authority. For some of you, that's the select board. For some of you, that's the town manager. Mention it to them, discuss it with them. And most committees have a finance committee liaison. If you have one and your proposal has a financial impact, talk to your finance committee liaison if they haven't been at your meeting to know that it's afoot. And if you don't have a finance committee liaison, then get in touch with the chair just to let them know what you're thinking about. Okay. Sometime by early November, you should have a draft of your proposed article on paper. Use staff support, if you have it, to help you draft. If you don't have staff support, use your select board liaison to help you draft. If you think you need town council review, you can ask for that through your select board liaison or through the town manager's office. And then it will be your job to show up at the town meeting, preview meeting, and summarize your proposal. You don't have to have it on paper at that point. You don't have to project anything, no slides, just to indicate that you're going to have an article, and this is in general what it's going to be about. Next, you're going to finalize your article for the warrant. And the article, as I mentioned, the article is what gives notice to voters of the topic that is going to be deliberated upon and voted upon at town meeting. And every article will have standard or any other action relative thereto in it. If it's funding, oftentimes you may notice that when the town has a funding article, it may identify 10 different places you could authorize the financing under, and by the time you get to, or it may identify, from free cash or bonds or raise and appropriate the money. And by the time you get to town meeting, the motion will have made those decisions. Okay, we've decided exactly where the money's going to come from. We've decided what authority we're going to use. And we've decided exactly what kind of action we want to be taking on this issue. But the article gives everybody notice of what is going to be discussed. This year, draft articles will be due by December 10th, and the final article will be due before the warrant closes on January 3rd. And when the draft article comes in, even though you've done a lot of preparation, because that town council review meeting will happen, there may be feedback that you get that requires changes in the language of your article. And therefore, you may have to do a second draft, submit that as your final draft, and you've got to get that done by January 3rd when the warrant closes. Okay. If you're sponsoring an article, you will be presenting on your article at a pre-town meeting hearing. And depending on what your article is, that will determine whose hearing you're presenting at, but someone will tell you. This gives you great opportunity to rehearse your presentation for town meeting, and I really recommend that people have their slides kind of done and in order so they can get comments on them and see how they work, see how they project, what do they look like. As I mentioned previously, it's best to have your motion drafted. It's not required, but it's a really good idea. If you are going to be presenting PowerPoint slides, there is an electronic presentation guideline and a template on the town website. And it's great. You can just take that template, download it to your own computer, and just start typing. And I am a dunderhead when it comes to using these kinds of programs, and I have no problem with it. So all of us can do it. And you know, it's great. It gives you the margins, it gives you the typeface, it gives you all kinds of stuff that will really help you prepare a presentation that will project and look okay and be readable on the screen. We're going to change the aspect ratio this year on the template, so there's going to be a new one. So for any of you who are used to, who've already got the template downloaded in your own computer, don't reuse that one. Go to the town website and download the new one. It's not there yet, but it will be. And aspect ratio is just width and height, and we're going to change that this year. A recommendation from the IT department. There will be comments and questions on your proposal at the hearing before town meeting, and it's really important to take those into account, at a minimum to be prepared to address them at town meeting, but maybe also to change, to reshape a little bit the proposal. It might, oftentimes people adjust their motions or change their proposals a little bit based on the feedback that happens at the hearings. Then it's the committee's job to submit a finalized motion by the deadline. The motion, again, is what town meeting will act upon. The motion must be within the scope of the article. That is a decision for the moderator to make. The moderator always consults with town council on scope issues as well, but it is the moderator's final call. Town council does review all the motions, and then motions that are under 100 words are always presented as the first and last slides of a presentation at town meeting, so it's up there on the screen. But motions that are over 100 words, they have to be printed on a handout and distributed at town meeting, because otherwise the print gets too small and it's just too hard to read it. So we do a handout for those, and then the slide, first and last, will say moved as printed in the handout. Again, you'll have to submit your PowerPoints and your handouts by the deadlines. You'll get, if you're sponsoring an article, everyone who's sponsoring an article gets lots of communication from the town meeting coordinator on what the deadlines are and what the obligations are, so none of this will be a surprise. It'll be important to conform to guidelines for both handouts and PowerPoints, and to receive the moderator approval. You will know when you have the moderator approval because you will get that from me by email. All slides have to be preloaded on the town's computers because that's how we do it. And you can't bring a thumb drive and think that you're going to plug it in somewhere. Everything is preloaded, and that, again, it just makes it so much easier for us. Handouts have to be double-sided, white paper, and we decide based on what we anticipate the attendance at town meeting to be on the number of copies for each night. We'll also let you know, and sometimes this moves around a little bit, what night we anticipate your article is going to come up. So if you're Article 40 on the warrant, clearly you don't need your handouts on the first 2 nights of town meeting. But if you're Article 15, there could be a question about when your article is going to come up. So we work on that, and you will hear from us about exactly what we think about timing. 6 o'clock is when we like to have all the handouts delivered to the cafeteria, or in the alternative, you can bring them to the town office and give them to the town manager's office and give them to the town meeting coordinator, and she'll make sure that they get there by 6 o'clock. And this is really important because a lot of people come early to town meeting and they pick up all their handouts and then they go sit down, and they're not coming back to look for handouts that didn't show up until 6:45. So really important to have those there by 6 o'clock. If you're sponsoring an article, you'll attend the town meeting coordination meeting. You'll know who you are planning to have speak, and you probably will have a request for how much time you think you need based on your hearing presentation, and you will be assigned a time, and the moderator may or may not agree with exactly how much time you need. The town clerk does notice all committees for meeting on all nights of town meetings. So if you come as a committee, you don't need to notice the fact that you're there. And as Carrie mentioned earlier, if you are voting on if an amendment is made to an article on the floor, to a motion rather, on the floor of town meeting, and your committee gets together quickly to take a position on the amendment, that's deliberation for legislative purposes, not for your committee governance purposes, and you don't actually need to be noticed for that, but you are, right? Because everyone's been noticed. And particularly if you think, it's great to have your whole committee there. If you're sponsoring an article, you really should have your whole committee there, because you don't know what's going to come up. Someone may have some amendment. Sometimes you know about them in advance, and sometimes they're a total surprise on the floor of town meeting. So really good to have your whole committee there to react. When you prepare your oral presentation for town meeting, do read your presentation aloud. It is the best way to edit your presentation. You need to hear it. It's different. What's on the page is different when you speak it. And you may realize that you have a particularly awkward turn of phrase on paper when you try to say it out loud. So that's the best way to edit your oral presentations. Please time yourself. And watch the video tutorial on speaking at town meeting, done by our own public information officer, Erin Stevens. It's on the website, and you can download that, and she will give you lots of good advice on how to speak when you're up at the podium. Okay, how about if you're not sponsoring an article? If you're not sponsoring an article, start with reading the warrant, okay? And identify any articles that are in the warrant that are within your committee's scope or of interest for you for one reason or another. If there is one, again, the open meeting law, put that discussion of an identified article that's of interest to you on an agenda and have a discussion. Thank you. On an agenda and have a discussion about it at a meeting. If it's appropriate, you might want to invite the sponsor of an article, especially if it's a citizen petitioner, to come and talk with you when your committee is considering an article. It's best practice to invite and consider public comment about what the public thinks your position as a committee should be. And it may be best, it isn't required, but it may be best to hold off on making your determination whether to recommend affirmative action, no action, or just not take a position until after the hearings are done, because stuff happens at the hearings and the landscape may look different than it did when your committee talked about it. And the public, I think, generally has more of a feeling that the hearings matter, and that public statements at the hearings matter if committees are waiting until after they happen. And if you can't be at the hearings, you can watch them. Your whole committee can watch them online, and they're simulcast, and then they're available very quickly on the website later. So you can certainly find out what happened at the hearings. If there is an article coming up that's you've identified it as within your scope of responsibility, really good idea to get your whole committee to go to that hearing. And do notice a meeting of your committee for the hearing, if you're all going to show up together. And determine whether you think your committee wants to speak at the hearing. And if so, you might want to prepare a statement as a committee on a particular article that's being heard. And if you do that, don't forget about the open meeting law when you're working on your statement. So committee's recommendation options are 3: affirmative action, no action, or just not taking a position. If you are making a recommendation for affirmative action or no action, you can ask the moderator for time to speak on your recommendation. You can ask the moderator to announce your recommendation. You can also prepare a handout on your recommendation. And again, got to comply with the guidelines and be submitted in advance for approval, copied on white paper, etc. If you do plan to speak on an article, please do attend the moderator's town meeting coordination meeting. And if you want to ask the moderator to announce your recommendation, send the moderator an email at moderator@concordma.gov. If you are distributing a handout, again, the guidelines, these are on the, are they on the website? Well, they will be. I think they're on the website. You're going to submit the handout to the moderator for approval and deliver the required number on white paper by 6 o'clock. Concord relies for so much of its good governance on its committees. Thank you all for your time and your talent and your dedication to our community. Any questions?
Thank you, Carmen, as always. And for those of you who don't know, last year there were a series of, I think, 4 or 5 events sponsored jointly with the town and the League of Women Voters in even more detail about town meeting, including its history, and what you would do if you're a citizen interested in it, and those are online as well, so I found them quite interesting. So thanks again, Carmen. Now let me introduce Tom McCain, the chair of the Select Board, to talk about efficient meeting management. Tom.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank you all for coming this morning. Attending a meeting such as this is the first and perhaps the most important step in making town government work better. Item 3 of this year's Select Board goals is to provide guidance and resources for all town volunteers serving on boards, committees, and commissions to improve consistency and efficiency in public meetings and hearings through continued training. So I would appreciate if you have any suggestions as to how this process can be improved, please let us know after this. You've heard from town moderator and the town clerk that there are many rules and regulations regarding public business. If you violate any of these rules, we're lucky in Concord because MCI Concord is nearby, so your family can come visit you. More seriously, the big problem, I think, is going to be you get yourself into problems with conflict of interest. Open meeting regulations are complex, and they're evolving, and they're changing. And I think the main message that you all want to have is that if you have a question, seek out the right source to get the answer to that question. And the statute that applies to the open meeting is Mass General Laws 30A, sections 18 through 25. Now, I know most people who aren't lawyers think that looking at a statute is similar to reading an insurance policy. It doesn't help at the end at all. These statutes actually are fairly logical and consistent, and you can understand them. So it's not a bad idea to take a look occasionally at the statute if there's a particular question. I'm going to talk primarily about best practices that can be done. Each board, commission, and committee have a different charge, and there's often not only one correct way to conduct a public meeting or hearing. But the first step is to schedule the public meeting. All public bodies are subject to the open meeting law, which requires that meetings be posted at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting, excluding Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. The following information is required to be included in the meeting posting: the name of the committee, the date and time of the meeting, and be specific as to the date, not just next Tuesday, and the location of the meeting. And be sure to confirm that the proposed location meeting site is available by checking with the town manager's office. Generally, Andrew Mara is the amara@concordmass.gov is the person who will be able to provide you the location. All meeting postings should be sent to the town clerk's office as early in advance of the meeting as possible. Under Mass General Laws 30A, Section 18, there is a provision for an emergency meeting that requires sudden, generally unexpected occurrence or set of circumstances demanding immediate action. So if there is something comes up and you've got to have a meeting, you need to put on the record that the set of circumstances that require the emergency meeting, but you may well be exempt from that 48 hours with holidays and all the rest. So that's an important aspect to be aware of. When preparing an agenda, when you announce the agenda of the meeting, focus on a logical flow and sequence for the meeting. Be sure that there's sufficient time allocated to cover the necessary items, including the discussion. If there's an item that's likely to have substantial public interest with an anticipated large audience, considering placing that earlier on the agenda. If they're town employees to present an item, factor that into your account. And likewise, if there are architects, engineers, lawyers, and other professionals that are going to be present, attempt to coordinate so that there's minimal amount of wasted time on their part. When you're holding the meeting, the presiding officer of the meeting has the control, and no one has the right to speak without first being recognized by the presiding officer. A safe guideline to follow is to treat all persons before you with the same courtesy and fair treatment that you would expect if you were to appear before a board or a committee. This may be difficult at times, and if matters become too heated, you can call for a break. While the presiding officer also has the authority to order the police to remove or detain any person who is disruptive, it is best not to do this unless there is a safety issue. Fortunately, this does not come up often in Concord meetings, but it always is a possibility. If someone becomes disruptive, does not heed the presiding officer's directives to stop, the better practice is to take a recess and even adjourn the meeting. In almost all instances after recess, the person usually stops the disruptive conduct. Ordering people removed from a meeting is fraught with danger. The meeting needs to be in a room large enough to accommodate all those who wish to attend. Now, there are various locations in Concord where meetings occur, a number of different rooms at Harvey Wheeler and Keyes Road, the new building at 55 Church in West Concord, Ripley School, and the townhouse, the assessor's office. Consider the room arrangement when using visual aids to assure that slides, map, plans, etc. are visible to both the board members and members of the public. The Historical Commission does a good job at this. Consider the use of an amplification system if the audience is large. The NRC meetings that I attended were often difficult to hear because there were a lot of people and the room setup was such that people's back were to you and it was difficult. Nameplates should be used and displayed at all times to assure that members of the public and those viewing on MMN are able to identify the participants. Meeting information should be distributed to committee members in advance of the meeting and have copies for the public at the meeting. This provides an opportunity for all members to come to the meeting prepared to participate. The chair of the meeting should make all participants feel welcomed, start on time, and be mindful of the agenda. Encourage questions or input with openness, but with an eye for the task at hand. Discussions should be audible to the public. Depending on the seating arrangement, committee members may not be facing the public during discussions, and some people may not always be able to hear comments made in conversational tone when one committee member is addressing another. I'm somewhat hard of hearing, so I'm sympathetic to those who wish board members would speak up. We're doing a little bit better job, and then we've gotten the sound systems in this building working better, but that's not always the case in all of the other meeting sites. Public comments should be welcomed but monitored. Different committees have comment periods at different points in their agenda. The school committee has public comments at the beginning of their meetings. Most have comment period near the end. One of the challenges that I've found is whether to have public comments immediately after an agenda item or wait until all the items have been completed. Since many who attend the select board meetings come for only one agenda item, I've often had public comments after a particular item. I'm not sure if there's any right way, but that's the committee chair has the decision as to when and how to take public comments. The Board of Selectmen, as they were then referred to, adopted on January 7th, 2013, a remote participation policy. It holds that a member of a town board is able to participate in a meeting remotely when the member is unable to attend the meeting for one or more of 5 permissible reasons as set forth below, and request permission from the chair at least 48 hours prior to the scheduled meeting. The member who participates remotely and all persons present at the meeting location shall be clearly audible to each other, and if the meeting is televised, the member participating remotely to be audible to the television audience. A quorum of the town board, including the chair or the person authorized to chair the meeting, shall be physically present at the meeting location. So the remote participant does not count for the issue of a quorum. To the extent practical, the member who participates remotely should have access to materials being used at the meeting location. Remote participation shall be limited to 1 member per scheduled meeting. Remote participation is not allowed for executive session meetings. The permissible reasons for the remote participation is personal illness or disability that does not affect the member's ability to perform his or her duties as a board member, a family or other personal emergency, military service, and significant geographical distance. Members participating remotely may vote and shall be counted as present for the meeting, and all votes taken during any meeting in which a member participates remotely shall be by roll call vote. Now, I would recommend that if you are notified, the chair is notified that there's going to be remote participation, Andrew has a handout that has all this information in it, and it's very helpful. We had a select board meeting where we had remote participation. It worked extremely well, but it does take some time and effort to get it set up correctly and to make sure that the process that's followed is the correct process. To go into an executive session, you must always be an open session. You use a roll call vote to go into executive session. The chair must specify the specific reason or reasons for the executive session and state all subjects that may be revealed without compromising the purpose for which the executive session was called. And for the various reasons, the chair must also state that open session will have a detrimental effect, and the chair must specify if you intend to reconvene in open session. Kari mentioned the importance of minutes of the meeting, and state law requires that all boards and committees must keep the meetings, minutes of the meetings of their proceedings, including subcommittee and task force committees. All committees, commissions, boards, and subcommittees and ad hoc committees shall appoint a clerk secretary who will be responsible for posting meeting notices and agendas, taking minutes of all meetings, and serving as record custodian. These records are public records, and records of any executive session remain closed to the public only so long as publication would defeat the purpose of the executive session. Minutes of the meeting should include the date, time, and place of the meeting, members that are present or absent, a summary of the discussion on each subject, a list of documents and other exhibits used at the meeting. Under state open meeting law, the documents and other exhibits used by a body at an open or executive session shall, along with the minutes, be part of the official record of the session. The decisions and actions taken at the meeting, exact wording of all motions, including who made and seconded the motion, a vote of each member. Those present and not participating in the vote should be recorded as abstentions, and the votes in executive sessions must be recorded in the minutes by a roll call. An issue has come up regarding when a member of the public wishes to correct minutes that, or a statement that is attributed to him or her. Unless the correction is due to a typographical error or an obvious mistake by the clerk secretary, the minutes should not be altered, and the party wishing to alter the minutes should request the change in writing, which request should be part of the record. So when somebody comes, we've had the select board, and somebody makes a statement, then they read it later, and they feel somehow that their intent was not recorded correctly. They should not be, they don't get to redo the minutes, but they can set a letter or attend the meeting and make the correction in person themselves. I think that issue came up in the Finance Committee at one point where there was a misstatement of fact, and the question was, should that be part of the record, or should there just be a correction at a later? And I think it's a lesson when we go and read the minutes as a public record. You might want to check the next minutes as well to see if there's been some type of a correction that's been added. Scheduling a public hearing. Public hearing is an official proceeding of a governmental body during which the public is accorded the right to be heard. Quorum of the public body must be present and must comply with the open meeting law, with the notice and other aspects. Where a public hearing is required by law, the particular statute governing the subject matter usually sets forth the applicable procedure requirements relating to the public hearing, such as notice requirement. The function of a public hearing is to collect information for the board in order to make a sound decision or recommendations. 2, to provide a process that meets the test of due process for any party whose rights will be materially affected by the decision. 3, to promote the perception of fairness so as to garner respect for the decision and the rule of law. And 4, to make a record for the decision in any legal review or appeal. The Select Board regularly holds public hearings regarding licensing, permits, etc. We've had public hearings regarding plans for recreational use of the Giroux land, and the Dog Park Feasibility Study Committee has their second scheduled public hearing on November 13th. The role of the chair at a public hearing is to be responsible for the pace and conduct of the meeting, setting and enforcing time limits on speakers, limiting comments that are tangential to the purpose of the hearing, and keeping committee members, presenters, and the public focused on the issues to be decided. The chair should explain the purpose of the hearing and how the information collected at the hearing will be used in reaching a decision. The hearing should be called to order and opened at the designated time. Committee members should be introduced to the public. A statement indicating what the board hopes to gain from listening to the public and what the next step in the process will be. The chair should note proper publication of the legal notice of the hearing and state the rules of procedure to be followed at the hearing. Recommended that the chair impose some limits on the time to be taken by the presenter and other speakers. It's important to keep the hearing going at a reasonably quick pace. Committee members should be well prepared to ask relevant questions and to listen to all sides of the proceeding and the deliberating respectfully so that the committee reaches an informed decision. A public hearing is concluded when all attendees desiring to speak have been heard. If more people want to be heard than the time allows, the board may consider continuing the hearing to a future date. When the oral portion of the hearing is completed, the hearing should be closed. Now I'll take any questions if anybody has any. Yes, I think we get.
Apologies, I missed the definition of an executive session. Could you just repeat that, please?
It's when it's closed to the public, in essence, that the committee has to vote to go into executive session, and there are the guidelines that there is a discussion that would be, I can get you the actual specifics, I think, here. A discussion that has sensitive issues. Let me see if I've got, to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than the professional competency of an individual, or to discuss discipline or dismissal of, or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. To conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation, to discuss the deployment of security personnel or devices or strategy with respect thereof, and to investigate charges of criminal misconduct or to consider filing of criminal complaints. So they're basically items that are sensitive in nature and you don't want the public to be aware of. And it's stated that those minutes, all the other requirements of every meeting apply to the executive session, but the minutes will become open when it is no longer necessary for the purpose of what the executive session is about.
A two-part question. And as an example, your board, you're the chairperson. When you mention you set the agenda, do the other members of the committee, or in your case, your board, get to submit items for the agenda? And if the public wants to put something on the agenda, how does that happen?
Okay, those good questions. Yes, as far as other members, they would in essence notify me or a town manager that there is a particular issue that they would like to have heard. And emailing to either the town manager or myself a particular item that you'd like to discuss doesn't mean that necessarily you'll be put on the agenda. Sometimes we do have a public comment agenda item, and I might recommend that you come in and speak about that. I think we had somebody who wanted to talk about sort of the final stages of life, and it wasn't something that the select board was going to take an action to, but notifying the public. I meet with the town manager Wednesday afternoons to prepare the agenda for the next select board meeting. We go over the different items, trying to make sure that we don't put too much on any one night, but that items of public interest, you know, very much we want to have brought forward. So, anybody?
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Well, so I have a couple of quick comments, and then we'll do the last session, which we humorously call, now that you've heard all about open meeting law and public records law and the process of town meeting and running an efficient meeting, what could possibly go wrong, right? But just going through each of the presentations, my comment and suggestion to you about what you heard from the town clerk is if you've got a question, ask. It has to do with open meeting law or public records law, just ask. There's a lot of folks in town who are experienced. Somebody on your committee might be experienced. The town clerk will help, and the state. I've called the Ethics Commission on a number of occasions. They're very efficient. They usually get back to you very, very promptly. So it's a very good set of resources. With respect to Carmen's presentation of town meeting for committees, try to get ahead of the curve. The hard part is when you're scrambling at the last minute to figure out funding or getting specific language of a warrant article. That tends not to do your cause any good. So if you're thinking about a warrant article, try to get out ahead of it. If you've heard of a warrant article that affects your committee or your domain, make sure you get a hold of the folks responsible for that, get them in, and start the process as early as you can. With respect to Tom's suggestion, the one thing I would tell you is do your homework. It makes such a huge difference when you've actually spent the time necessary to know what's coming, and you can sort of deal with it. The other thing I would say is remember that one of the important differences between a public meeting of your committee or board or commission and a public hearing is the public meeting is your committee's meeting. It is for you to meet to get done the business of your committee. You should be respectful of the public. You should encourage them to talk if it's going to be helpful. But what you don't want to do is forget that you have a job to do as a committee, and that's your responsibility. Also, with respect to the question about executive sessions, Tom read to you, but there's a very limited set of reasons that you can go into executive sessions, and for many, many of the town committees, there is no reason for you to go into executive session. So with that quick set of remarks, what could possibly go wrong? So do you have a question? And the folks who are presenting can pop up. So here we go for the first one. Yeah.
Sorry, just a comment on public hearings. A few years ago, the school bus issue was really hot in town. And I remember Lisa Bergen, who was our chair in that committee, when we had our public hearing, we structured it as a workshop because we figured townspeople would come with a variety of questions on a variety of topics. So we had one table on safety, one table on finance, and we split up into about 4 or 5 of these. That seemed to be pretty effective because the goal of the hearing was to find out how people felt about those various issues.
Right, exactly. And the Light Plan has done a public hearing very different than that. They had, in this room, set up various stations. So there's some latitude as to how to do that, and you're exactly right. We're trying to find out what the public thinks. So that's terrific. What's next? Judy, I know you, I thought I saw your hand up.
This was a question about the minutes, and I know that there had been a question about whether we could make corrections to the minutes and send them back before the next meeting. And I can understand that that is not acceptable under the open meeting law, but I was wanting to make sure that we could send out the minutes so that people could be prepared, could do their homework before the next meeting.
Absolutely, you can do that for sure. And I know in the past, I don't know if we'd still do it, but you know, I have taken on occasion to send out minutes to a member of the select board when I knew the subject in those minutes was really something that they had most of the input on, and to get their particular opinion. And when I was responsible for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for draft minutes. Sarah.
Along the same lines, if you had a draft article that you were going to discuss at the next meeting, is it okay to share that draft article with the committee when you share the agenda so that they can all read it in advance and be prepared?
Sure, just don't get into the deliberation, writing back to all when you get an email from the chair of the select board saying, here's something we're going to talk about, writing back and saying, well, I don't know, I think this is such a hot idea or whatever. That's where you start getting in trouble. What other questions do you have? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know the details on like a consent agenda. Sometimes you go to a meeting and they have a consent agenda, and it's kind of like titles. But everyone on the committee will seem to know what the background is for those titles. And that also kind of goes for if there's a consultant. Sometimes they just say, you know, XYZ consulting firm gave us the notes, and like everybody who's present as committee members has read and reviewed them, but a person coming to observe the meeting doesn't have that background.
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen? That can still remain open.
Who wants to address that question? Carrie, do you want to address it? Maybe grab the mic there.
I think that once something is described at a meeting and discussed at a meeting, it becomes a public document of the meeting. But the board members need to have the opportunity to review it. What they can't do is comment on it back and forth.
If I understood what you were saying, so
how
for
does
example,
a resident, an observer, or a citizen who's observing that meeting find out what that is, though?
So I think the point is on, for example, at select board meetings, the very first item is usually a bunch of what are called items on the consent agenda. And there's very little information usually conveyed about those. They're put on the consent calendar because they're considered routine and of no objection would be raised to them. I would just suggest if somebody's in the audience, they just stick their hand up. But I don't know what else might be required.
Thank you. The other question I had is regarding video or recording of meetings, whether it's just audio alone or video and the audio, whether Minuteman Network is the go-to, or can private people come and just like record meetings? Because there seems to be different procedures or things allowed.
Sure.
Is
Well,
there a
first of all, any public meeting can be videotaped or recorded by a citizen, and you can't disallow that activity. With permission of the chair. Let him.
Prior to the meeting, notify the chair
denied. Did you have any question? We're over here.
Interaction with the press.
Yes, we do. We usually have a member of the press attend most of our select board meetings. I think they tend to show up at other committee meetings when there's an item that has somehow been identified by them or some citizens as particularly important. Tom, did you have a comment on that?
What I would add is be careful when you're speaking to the press to make it known that you're speaking for yourself and not for the committee, unless there is an issue that in fact the committee has discussed and is kind of on the record for. That can get everybody into sort of hot water if one of the members of a committee expresses an opinion about something and it's their opinion, not the committee's opinion. So it's, you know, we want to encourage the press to have information about what's going on in the town, but one always has to be a little bit careful about when dealing with the press, because if it's something that may be a hot button issue, I would refer them to the town manager's office.
Thank you. Other question? Well, again, on behalf of all of us, thank you, number one, for coming, but more importantly, thank you for the service you provide to the town by serving on one of the town's commissions, boards, or committees. So thanks very much to Tom, Carmen, and Carrie. And let me also thank Aaron Stevens, who helped us get things arranged, and handouts of the slides are back on the back table, along with some other information, so please take them on your way out, and have a good afternoon, and don't forget West Concord Day today.